Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for episode 7 of It's Bigger Than You Think, a conversation about the politics that most impact your daily lives. I'm Annie Moore, and with me today is Ian Pryor. He's the co-founder of dailymalarkey.com and also the executive director of the political action committee Fight for Schools. Super excited that you're here, Ian. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. Looking forward to talking.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get right into it. So you partnered with some Virginia parents when you started this PAC, Fight for Schools. Can you tell our audience a little bit more about that and why you started it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, for really over a year, parents have been showing up at school board meetings, making their voice, trying to make their voices heard, and they just didn't feel like they were getting anywhere. And, I wasn't one of those parents. I did appear at one school board meeting, I think in September or October. And the reason why I did, I had written a Federalist op-ed, and the school board in Loudoun County was proposing a professional code of conduct that would essentially subject teachers to discipline for speaking out against the school's push towards, quote, equity. And that could be on their own private time. Whether it's talking to a neighbor or sending a text, it wasn't just social media. And I saw that and said, that is an absolute First Amendment violation. I've got to go out and speak out about that. So I did. We pushed that in the media to make sure that attention was brought to that issue because, First Amendment is one of the foundational principles, if not the foundational principle of what our country is about. And, if teachers don't have the right to speak out about what's going on in class, then parents aren't going to know, because certainly the administration, the school board have been extremely irresponsive on this. And that was really kind of the extent of my involvement, but there were several folks going there talking about, the implementation of critical race theory, state-sponsored racism really in schools, and talking about opening schools and the need to reopen schools because of all the problems that kids were having learning in this environment. And so, fast forward to March of 2020, and there was a private Facebook group of about 600 members. They called themselves the Anti-Racist Parents of Loudoun County. It was actually the sort of fire was started on a Sunday or Saturday morning when one of the school board members posted, this anti-critical race theory faction is growing. We need to push back. And what happened throughout that was just some really nasty talk from, neighbors to neighbors, parents to parents about the people that have been speaking up at school board meetings. What followed was another post calling for volunteers that could essentially expose the people that were speaking out. One thing actually suggested hacking their websites and redirecting it to pro-critical race theory websites, and then raising money for the effort. And people just started dropping names in this Facebook group, names, area of residence, and school board rep. And there were dozens of parents that were put in there. And they weren't all just for speaking out against critical race theory. Some of them were put on there because they went to the school board meeting and were speaking up for opening schools. And, this eventually got out. I was contacted by a reporter that asked me if I knew anything about it. I told him that I knew a little bit. He said, well, you're on the list. And, I was surprised, but not that surprised. I did write a Federalist op-ed. I did speak at one school board meeting, but I certainly wasn't, leading the effort. And I was put on the list twice, once for the Federalist op-ed, once for, quote, First Amendment concerns. And, what that did was it really unified these two different groups of parents that were speaking out on two very different things to get something done here, because enough is enough. I mean, you had 6 school board members in this group while this was happening. The fire was lit in these posts by a school board member. You had the Commonwealth Attorney for Loudoun County in there as well, and a member of the Board of Supervisors of Loudoun County in there as well. And parents were furious. They lost trust. They've lost trust in their school board for the past year, and this was really the final nail in the coffin, so to speak. So, we exposed what happened. And from there, we got together and we said, what can we do? And we made the decision that there was enough legal precedent for recalling these school board members for, having a quorum of them in a private Facebook group that was restricted based on your viewpoint. So we held a press conference. We announced that we were going to recall these school board members. And we set up a political action committee that started raising money for the effort. And our first recall gathering event really was put together pretty quickly. It was a last minute idea. We weren't really thinking about starting until probably Memorial Day, but we got permission to wait for cars leaving the GOP convention on May 8th, and we collected over 1,500 signatures that day. And then once that happened, the floodgates were open. I mean, we had hundreds of volunteers that want to go out and collect signatures, people asking where they can where they can sign. And, it's been nonstop since then. And, the movement is growing, and parents just are fed up with, a school system that is not responsive to their needs, that doesn't communicate with them, that doesn't give them a seat at the table. And the trust has been broken. And when you send your children into school every day, I don't care if you're Republican, Democrat, Independent, whatever, you are placing your trust in that school system to give your children a quality education that is not divisive, that does not seek to look at people through an identity group lens, a racial lens. And that is what ultimately we're seeing. And, we can't get any answers from the administration, the school board. They accuse us of peddling misinformation, but in reality, they're the public officials that are out there, misquoting people like me to make their point. When in reality, our argument is, we understand that nobody is teaching critical race theory 101 in public schools in Loudoun County, Virginia. But what they are doing is, through their equity and culturally responsive learning, are implementing at a rapid pace critical race theory concepts that I think that if you look at the news in Loudoun County, you see the exact result of what that is: divisiveness. It's divided a community. It is pitted parent against parent. And ultimately, the school board and the administration is responsible for that.
Okay, so obviously you've worked with this issue super closely in Loudoun County. I did like a Google Trends search just to see kind of like what people are Googling in relation to, critical race theory and the politicization of, our kids' education. And some of the most common things were, what is it? For dummies, explained. People don't really understand like what it actually is. So could you kind of explain that and then touch a little bit more on like why it's harmful for students?
Yeah, absolutely. Critical race theory views everything through the lens of race. And essentially it says that all our institutions, our language, our culture, our schools, our legal system are all systemically racist. And therefore, in order to fix that, you need to be an anti-racist. And if you are merely somebody that believes in meritocracy, Western style liberalism, and equal opportunity for all, and you are not an anti-racist working to tear down this system, then you yourself are racist, and you yourself are part of the problem. That is critical race theory in a nutshell. Now, why it's important to not put that kind of thing in front of young children is, one, these are young children. They have not developed critical thinking skills. First step to building tolerant human beings is to make them understand that everybody is an individual first. The color of their skin, their religion, their ethnicity doesn't matter. What matters is who they are inside, what they want to be, what their goals are. And that is what children should learn. If you start putting these ideas in 5, 6, 7, 8-year-old kids, even if it is not, a direct statement, but it's weaved in through the materials and through the presentations, you're ultimately teaching kids that, white kids should feel guilt, Black kids should feel victimized, mixed race kids should feel confused. And what we see is that the Asian population, especially in Loudoun County and in Fairfax County, are left behind as collateral damage. And this is not how we should be running our school systems. This is not how we should be treating our community. This is divisive, it's regressive, and as you see, it's destructive.
Could you give a kind of lesson example almost?
The most egregious example of this was a video that went somewhat viral in March, where you had a high school student on a digital, probably a Zoom, with his teacher, and they showed a picture of two women. Now, these two women were actually fraternal twins, but if you looked at them, you would think, well, they may be of different races.
Tell me what this seems to be a picture of.
It's just two people chilling.
Right, just two people. There's nothing more to this picture?
Nah, not really. Just two people chilling.
I don't believe that you believe that. I don't believe that you look at this as just two people. I don't think
Truly
you
is
can look
just
at
two
this as
people,
just
though,
two
is it
people.
not?
Yeah, but I think you're being intentionally coy about what this is a picture of.
What would I be being coy about? It's two people standing back to back in a picture.
Yeah, and that's all you see is two people.
I'm confused on what you would like me to speak on in that
I
sense.
don't think you are. I don't know why you do this. I'm not trying to call you out, but you come out off of mute to talk about what this is a picture of, and you act as if there's nothing noticeable about this apart from the fact that they're two people.
Well, I'm confused. Are you trying to get me to say that there are two different races in this picture?
Yes,
is that
I
what
am
you
asking
want
you
me
to
to
say
say?
that.
Well, at the end of the day, wouldn't that just be feeding into the problem of looking at race instead of just acknowledging them as two normal people?
No, it's not, because you can't look at the people and not acknowledge that there are racial differences, right?
But if we're going for, let's say if we're looking for equality within all this, then why would we need to point out things such as that?
Because those differences are real things.
That, in a nutshell, is what Loudoun County Public Schools is implementing into their system, which is we need to start dividing people on the basis of race, on other immutable characteristics, and then start discussing different people as the oppressed and the oppressors. And we've seen documents that show that, Christians are the oppressors, non-Christians are the oppressed, even that light-skinned people of the same race are oppressors and dark-skinned people of that race are the oppressed. They are just dividing constantly. Now, that particular thing wasn't a lesson for students, but it was a training done by the Loudoun County Equity Office for its teachers. So if you're training your teachers to think this way, what are they going to do with that? They are going to implement that in how they teach. One mother sent over a slide where it was presented to second graders, asking them to be anti-racist activists. And it also said something along the lines of, women and people of color never get credit for their work. And then the girl went home and said to her mom, is this true that women don't get credit for their work? And parents are saying to me, to others, this is not your job. You are the government. We put our kids in your care to teach them how to think, right? How to think about, whatever it is, math, reading, science, not what to think. And that is ultimately what we're seeing across Loudoun County and really across America.
Okay, so obviously in addition to all of this politicization that's being taught in schools, Virginia has historically some of the best public schools in the United States, but now the Department of Education is starting to try to limit access to advanced placement AP courses for some of their students in the name of equity. Do you think that that's a serious concern in Virginia and across the country?
It's absolutely a serious concern. When that happened, I think that was just another step up in this process where parents started to get outraged at what was going on. And, people will try and brand this, our opposition brands this as this is a Republican effort. I can tell you, we've got Democrats, we've got independents. Their primary focus is not people's political affiliation when it comes to their kids. And taking away things like advanced math until you get to 11th grade, advanced diplomas, even I saw something from the African American History Commission where they want to de-emphasize focus on the Pledge of Allegiance and the 4th of July. These are extremely concerning things to people. And, a lot of parents, they feel hopeless. They're not getting proper communication from their school systems. They're not getting treated with respect. They're being accused of spreading misinformation, and they don't know what to do. Some of them can send their kids to private school. Some of them have the option to homeschool their kids, but others don't have those options. So what I'm starting to see is a lot of people saying, I might just leave. If we can't change the trajectory of education in Virginia, I might just leave. I might go to Florida or some other state where we don't have to worry about what our kids are learning or not learning every day.
So are you seeing that the same, people who are fighting back against this politicization of education, that they're also the ones that are advocating for more school choice?
Yeah, I think that's probably something that people are thinking about. A lot of people are in this are very mission focused, and we're trying to make a change now. so that, we can make sure that the public schools that are available will provide a quality education as dictated by the Virginia Constitution. But I do think that you're starting to see people recognize that there needs to be a different system, because what we're seeing is a complete failure of the public school system. Taxpayer money is going to these systems. And it is, we look at Loudoun County, Virginia, where they have 65% of the total Loudoun County budget, which I believe is something like $1.4 billion. $1.4 billion is going to pay consultants, special interest groups to come in and shape teacher trainings, curriculum, books in the library, all things that parents are appalled that their taxpayer dollars are going to. So I think that school choice is something that people are looking at as a possible solution to this if we can't make a change with what we're doing.
You mentioned that, all these consultants are coming in doing like teacher trainings, things like that. Teachers that don't agree with some of the stuff that's going on, they're afraid of being canceled and losing their jobs, and rightfully so. There was a high school football coach that lost his job, and then there's some teachers in different school districts across country that have been threatened of getting fired for not agreeing or refusing to teach this kind of curriculum. What do you think of how cancel culture has infiltrated our schools and society, kind of as a whole?
That's absolutely right. And I can tell you, I've spoken to dozens of teachers on Zoom calls, in person, and they are afraid. I mean, they want to go and speak up against this kind of thing, but they don't want to have to deal with being pulled out of school, being placed on administrative leave, having to go through a litigation, being put in that position. And that is why I went and spoke at that school board meeting in the first place, because if teachers are afraid to speak out, they're the ones seeing what is happening in the classroom. And if you silence those teachers, you are severing a lifeline to the parents so that they can understand what their kids are learning. So what that tells me is that you have school systems that don't want the parents to know. They know that if the truth comes out, if the materials come out, if they're transparent about it, parents are going to be outraged. And, we've done this through FOIAs. We've done this through, people giving this stuff to us anonymously or giving this information to us saying, please don't use my name. And we certainly always respect that. But, I can tell you that it's a dangerous time when the rights of teachers are silenced, when parents are attacked for expressing their First Amendment or exercising their First Amendment rights. It is a real problem. And I think what you're seeing now in Loudoun County, Virginia, especially with this lawsuit, is it's almost elevated past opening schools. It's elevated past critical race theory. It's really a battle for the First Amendment and transparency and responsible government. And unfortunately, because I live there, and I'm seeing it on a day-to-day basis, Loudoun County has really become the epicenter for that.
So we've seen in polls that Democrats and Republicans, both independents, they all see cancel culture as a negative. Do you think that that's going to impact elections this year and in 2022?
I absolutely do. And I would point to a New York Times story that discussed these school issues, not so much cancel culture, but it's all sort of woven in. And I was struck by a few of the comments from Democrat consultants that this is a real problem for Democrats. They are caught in between what they actually believe, which is that a lot of this stuff is nonsense, and what their activist base believes, which is this is the greatest thing ever, and we're going to keep pushing this. So they're caught between Scylla and Charybdis here. If they go one way or the other, they're going to end up having problems in elections. And I think James Carville talked about this a couple of weeks ago, where he said this cancel culture, this woke thing that's going on with Democrats, they've got to get away from it, because if they don't, people are going to, traditional Democrats, even traditional liberals, and independents are going to walk away from those candidates and the Democrat Party until they can somehow fix this.
Do you think cancel culture is something that Republicans at all levels of government should prioritize when they're, running for their elections these next couple of years?
I do, and I think they need to be judicious on how they message it. A lot of people, when they hear cancel culture, they think it's, that's a Republican buzzword. But what is cancel culture? Cancel culture is taking away people's First Amendment rights. It's taking away transparency. It's taking away information. That information serves the public. And when we're talking about school issues, we're talking about understanding what our kids are being taught. And should we trust our schools with our most precious children that are all our top priorities. And, I think we've also seen instances where kids will say something. I mean, look, teenagers don't have the best judgment. I think we all know that. Sometimes they say something, it's taken out of context, or it's said in a pop culture type mannerism, and it gets blown out of proportion, and then they end up being canceled and bullied and death threats and all of that. And, to the extent that we're creating, junior activists in schools that see what's going on, that see the silencing of people because of simple mistakes or miscommunications, it's going to be a problem long term for this country.
So most of Virginia's state government is up for election this year. What is one thing that you want to say to voters ahead of the elections in November?
I would say that all eyes of the nation are currently on Virginia, and this school issue, whatever it is, whether it's open schools, whether it's, critical race theory, state-sanctioned racism in schools, these are on the minds of parents. And what we've seen is, the parents that don't know what's going on, it's important to let them know, because when they find out, polling shows that if you talk to them about equity and are you in favor of equity, they'll say, sure, because it sounds like a nice word. But when you actually explain the difference between equity and equality, when you actually explain what critical race theory is, what it stands for, how it's applied in schools, the numbers go through the roof. I'm talking like 78% disapproval of this kind of thing. So I think it's important for, people running for office to get the data, to understand what their messaging needs to be, and to educate the public on exactly what is going on in public schools. Because when you make that argument and you make it with facts and data, people will say, that's not going to happen here. And they will ultimately support whoever comes out against it.
Ian, do you have any final thoughts for our listeners today?
I would say that it's important as parents, as taxpayers, as grandparents, to understand what is going on when your kids go to school. This is what's going to set them up for the rest of their life. All we want is for our kids to be successful in life. This is how we need to make sure that happens. So whether it's sending FOIAs, whether it's talking to other parents that are involved, you're going to get a load of word salad from the superintendent of your schools. You're going to get nonsense from the school board. They're going to keep feeding you misinformation. And then they're going to say what the parents in the community, they're the ones feeding misinformation. But they'll never step up. They'll never have a conversation. They use a book by an author by the name of Glenn Singleton, a famous anti-racist and equity coach. And the name of the book is Courageous Conversations. And it's littered throughout, it's in Ralph Northam's African American History Commission document. It's in Loudoun County Public Schools teacher trainings. But here's the thing, they don't want to have courageous conversations. They're afraid to have courageous conversations with parents because they know that parents know the truth. And they are being influenced by special interests, outside groups that have gotten a foothold into our education system, and they're leaving the parents behind. And so I would say, do your best to understand the issue. Don't let these government bodies mislead you as to what's happening. Do your own research, find your own materials, and speak up.
Awesome. Ian, thanks so much for joining us today. Thank you everybody for listening, watching, tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the pod on whatever platform you're on, and always remember, it's bigger than you think.